the goal for us today is for you to learn at least one thing and to be able to take something away from this presentation. So I hope we can provide that for you. Okay, so I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about our firm so you can kind of understand where we're coming from in the background here. At Rise Private Wealth Management, our goal is to provide financial advice that brings you confidence, simplicity, and success. So today we hope to present a bunch of complex concepts in a simplified way for you. And typically we like to do this presentation interactive in person. But we have the chat box up. I'll try to monitor it as we're going. So please feel free to enter questions in there. And if not, if we don't get to it during the presentation, we'll try to get to it at the end. If you have some more personal, individualized questions, I'm going to throw a link in the chat box at the end to request a consultation with us, just so we can answer some of those more individualized questions on a one-on-one private basis. So tell you a little bit about our firm's vision, and our goal is to be the most referred and recognized wealth management practice in the industry with a strong community presence. So our location is actually in Bedford, New Hampshire. I know some of you are joining us not from New Hampshire, but this location is actually right near where we used to meet at Manchester Country Club. We're right over the hill, but we also have locations all over the country in Kansas, Maine, Florida, but we help people right at home in New Hampshire as well. So that's just a little bit about us and our firm. So let's get into the nitty gritty. At Ameriprise and at Rise, what we look at when we look at retirement is what we call the confident retirement approach. Now, what you'll see here, we like our shapes here. So you'll see some triangles and circles today. So we just try to keep it simple and straightforward. So I like to equate this to, many people have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically the concept is that you have to have your first step here before you can move upwards in this triangle. So the first thing here in this green box is covering essentials. Now, when we think about getting to retirement, the things that we think about are making sure that you can eat, you have a roof over your head. So these are covering essentials like your groceries, your utilities, your property taxes, which are never going to go away. And we like to make sure your plan is covered with certain guaranteed incomes. So what are guaranteed incomes? These are things like Social Security, if you're lucky enough to have a pensions, and for some people it's appropriate to have annuities, and those are going to be fixed incomes that cover your fixed expenses. So once we have this covered, the next is the fun stuff, right? Ensuring lifestyle. So these are things that we like to call basically anything you did before COVID that you couldn't do during COVID. So travel, dining out, for some people who like golf, some people say the essential is golf expense, but I don't know, that's up for debate depending on who you are. But we like to have investments in your portfolio to match that are variable, right? Because you're not going to go on you might most likely you're not going to go on the same vacation every single year with the same exact cost, right? So we need some of these things to be flexible to change, to adjust to our ever-changing lifestyles. Now, once we have that covered, we want to prepare for the expected. Now, this is what we call your plan B, right? So, plan A is everything goes as planned. You live a long, healthy life. And you pass away peacefully. But we all know, and we all have heard stories where that just simply isn't the case. So these are things preparing for things like premature death, illness, disability, unexpected expenses to your home, or family support needs, right? So these are things that we cover with extra cash or certain insurances, right? Health insurance, property and casualty insurance, life insurance, long-term care. We'll talk a little bit more about that stuff later on in the presentation as well. And lastly is leaving a legacy. So I like to talk about this in one of two ways with our clients. First is the very traditional way that we think about, right? When we pass away, where do we want our money to go? Do you have charitable causes that are important to you? Or do you want it to go to your kids or your grandkids? With other people, they want to have a living legacy, meaning they want to see everyone enjoy the money while they have it and not leave as much when they're gone. So they want to experience that with their kids. So those are things that we talk about once we've kind of covered these other three big areas. But this also can be a really fun conversation just to determine, where people want to go and how they want to leave their legacy. So next, I want to talk about the topic of this conversation, the unique financial concerns that women face and how we can combat that. Women wear plenty of different hats, often at the same time, as you all well know. You might be the primary breadwinner. You might run your household. You might have to take care of your kids or your parents or both. So women you face some unique challenges with balancing their finances as long as everything else in life. So that's kind of where this presentation comes into play and where we help people make sure that they're doing everything right for themselves as well as their family. So today, some of the things that we're going to cover are the income gap women face, longer lifespans, which actually have some very real monetary impacts to your own financial future, the multiple roles and responsibilities that everyone faces, and all as well as the changes that might impact your finances. And we'll look at all these a little bit closer today. So let's start with the income gap. Now, we've made a lot of strides over the past few decades for women increasing the rate they earn compared to men. But as of 2019, women still only earn 82 cents for every dollar that men earn. Now, of course, that's an improvement. The stat I have here is from 1980. It was 64 cents on every dollar. But nonetheless, it is a reality that we still need to face and deal with. The other is that women often take time off to take care of families, right? Which enlarges this income gap. So the thing that people don't think about is, yes, so obviously you're going to be earning less money, but other things that this impacts is your ability to earn Social Security. Now, Social Security takes into consideration your highest 35 earning years. So if you're taking some of your peak earning years off to take care of family members, which is great, it does impact not only your current income, but future income that in that whole calculation. So just some things to consider and be aware of when we're thinking about our salaries. So of course, this is the reality, but what are things that we can do about it? So how can we address the income gap? We're going to talk about one of three ways today. One, negotiate a better salary. Two, maximize workplace benefits. And three, invest wisely to optimize your savings. So let's take a closer look at negotiating your salary. So it's just a fact that people who negotiate a higher salary upfront do better in the long run. That's due to compounding raises, right? So if you start higher and you get a percentage raise, you're going to get a higher dollar amount from that. Now, the average raise is 2 to 2.5% increase per year, but the average job negotiation change will yield a 4.5% increase in salary. But the specific challenges for women is that the fact of the matter is that women don't always negotiate, and we negotiate less than our male counterparts. So only 30% of women negotiate their salary compared to the 46% of men. So negotiating your salary, not only every time you change jobs, but even at your reviews is going to help you in the long run. But especially if you're going to change jobs, negotiating that upfront can make a huge difference for your overall earnings long term. The other thing you'll want to think about when negotiating salaries, and this is something that we're going to dive into a little bit more, is considering your workplace benefits. Those are going to be retirement benefits, health insurance, vacation time. All those things have different numerical values. So making sure that you really understand how much you're currently earning, and if you were to get a new position, how much you are earning there with benefits included is crucial to make sure that you're not putting yourself or setting yourself up for a disadvantage there. So next, talking about making the most of your workplace benefits. There's a lot of comprehensive packages for your workplace benefits. So some of the things that we commonly see are your health, life, and disability income insurance. Now, things we work with people on and things that you should look at are not only your benefits, but also your spouse's benefits. So there's oftentimes options to hold yourself plus your spouse, yourself plus children, and there's all different levers that you can pull for that. So assessing what the cost is in each different scenario is going to be really important for you and your family to make sure that you're really getting the best deal. Now, the other thing that people don't often realize is that your life insurance and your disability insurance, or especially for life insurance, sometimes your spouses or you can hold spousal coverage for an inexpensive cost. So looking at all the options that are offered to you from your workplace is going to be really crucial. Next is understanding your retirement plans. Now, some people might have pensions, some people might have deferred compensation options, but most have 401ks and employer matching. So just understanding the matches involved in that and making sure you're maximizing that. And knowing all the different parts of that 401k plan is really crucial. So there's going to be some investment options in there, but there also might be different tax options for contributions. So what I'm talking about is Roth options, pre-tax options, or even after-tax options. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation as well, and how you can diversify there. Next, utilizing the tax advantages, which is what I just talked about. And lastly is evaluating all the other benefits your workplace has to offer. Now, what we've seen a lot of lately is, you health savings accounts. Some of you may have heard of flex savings accounts for health and dependent care, tuition reimbursement plans, employer-sponsored scholarships. Most recently, I've seen even student loan repayment options, or even legal plans. So you can get legal advice for a very cost-effective price. And you're able to do some of your estate documents with that too. So just being sure that you look through your benefits and knowing that you're maximizing everything that makes sense for you and your family. And that can add up to real savings over time. Okay, so the third section that we're going to talk about for the income gap is investing wisely. Now, what we talk about here is determining your risk tolerance, getting invested, diversifying, and staying invested. So we'll dive into each of these topics a little bit more. So determining your risk tolerance. People talk about risk a lot, and this is going to generalize typically how women approach risk versus men, but I'll tell you, in my situation, I think the roles are reversed. I think my husband's a little bit, we are a little bit of the opposites here. So this is just a little bit of a different perspective. But, according to some studies, compared to men, women are more risk aware. And we think about more problems that could come into play when we're thinking about our risk. And we do more research, but sometimes that leads to women not taking enough risk, which can actually be detrimental to your future. So what I like to talk about with people when they're thinking about risk is first, what's your goal for this money? Is this money long-term? Is this for retirement? Or is it for a house you want to buy in a year or two? And depending on that, that's going to determine, that's going to narrow down what your risk tolerance should or shouldn't be. And then we can talk about some of these more personal questions. Does it make you feel uncomfortable when the stock market goes up and down? When you hear the news talking about, did what happened in 2008 make you really nervous, right? And talking through all those things to determine, okay, this is my time horizon, and this would be an appropriate risk for me, but this is what I'm comfortable with, and then we can go from there. So that's how I like to talk about risk with my clients, and just that thought process to be able to narrow in where you really want to go with that. Now, this is one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk a little bit about the time value of money. So in this chart, what you're going to see here is talking about the importance of getting invested and also staying invested. So what I'm going to start with here is this example is a 35-year-old woman in this light blue color. She invests $5,000 per year for 30 years. Assuming a 6% interest rate, assuming over the lifetime of this 30 years, she's going to end up with $14,000 in change. Okay. Now let's see what happens when a starts investing for $5,000 per year. Now, right? And this is the same interest rate, 6%, and she ends up with $94,964. Now, the math in your head real quick, right? $5,000 contributing for 30 years, that's going to be $150,000 over time. $5,000 over 20 years is $100,000. So it's only a $50,000 difference in contributions. What this shows here is just the time, the value of time and having your money invested long-term. Now, the last option here is a 55-year-old woman. Now she is contributing $6,000 because she's coming up and she really wants to be ready for that. So she's $60,000 over time. She ends up with $83,130. So the lesson here is that the early bird gets the worm, right? This is just the concept of time value of money and compounding earnings. And that just makes the most sense here, which I think is what Renee is saying in the chat box as well. So getting the earlier you start investing, the more wealth you can build is the main purpose of this slide. Okay, let's talk about diversifying. That's a buzzword we hear all the time, right? So the big thing here is looking at making sure you're diversified, but also staying in your risk tolerance to help reduce the risk over time. So when we think about what happened in March of 2020 with COVID, we saw a lot of people, or we've heard about a lot of people when the stock market really went down, people saw their money basically losing money before their eyes. That's what it felt like for a lot of people. And a lot of people, without the help of someone, decided to move their money to cash. And what we did at our office for our clients was we just said, you know what, stocks are on sale. So we're going to buy more and rebalance to make sure that we're within your risk tolerance. So little moves like that and making sure you're staying diversified, making sure you're staying within your risk tolerance was what's going to help you over time. Because in my example, those people who decided to go to cash, right, they don't know when to get back in. They don't know when the right time is. When the market was going back up, is it now? Is it in a month? Is it in 2 months? You know, so having someone by your side to coach you through that is super helpful. But also just staying diversified within your risk tolerance and keeping it that way and being able to monitor and manage and balance that is super, super crucial for diversification. Now, this is the other way we like to talk about diversification. And a lot of people don't think about diversifying tax-wise. I'm going to move my screens around a little bit here so I can draw on this. So bear with me. Okay. So we like to talk about tax diversification with our clients. And the way we think about this is what we call the tax control triangle. And there's 3 different buckets that you can save into. The first one on this bottom right here is what we call the tax deferred bucket. So the money goes in. This is things like your 401k. Now, the thing that I like to have people visualize is this is before it even, right? So your check, you pay tax to the government, you put money in your traditional 401k, that money grows and grows and grows, and it ordinary income, right? So other things in this, as I mentioned before, are or traditional IRAs. And those are things that you put in before tax and they grow and grow and grow. And then they tax at your ordinary income when you decide to pull that out. And typically, if you don't elect anything in your 401k, that is the option that is elected for you if you're automatically enrolled. The next bucket here is the taxable bucket. This is what we call the tax me now bucket. So you had your paycheck that correctly. You've contributed pre-tax to your 401k. This in what we call your savings account. So this is you might be getting, I don't know, $1 a year in interest on your checking and savings account right now. Other accounts that fall into this bucket are typical brokerage accounts. So if you think of people who have Robinhood and invest in those types of apps and brokerage accounts, they're non-qualified accounts. The tax treatment on that is where there's two options: capital gains. Okay, so if you hold your stocks, be treated as long-term capital gains, and if a year, it's going to be short-term capital gains. So that's going to be short-term capital gains is going to be your income rate, same as what we talked about over here, and then over a year, it's going to be that long-term capital gains treatment, which is either 15 or 20% depending on your income. But that's also up for discussion right now on if that is going to be increased. There's talks of the long-term capital gains treatment going up to 40%. So another reason why diversification is important. The last bucket up here is one of our favorites. The money goes in after tax. So like we followed this money trail. Your money goes to your 401k, then deposited in your checking and savings account. Money up here after tax, and that money will grow and grow and grow, and it'll come out tax-free. So these are options for 401k or IRA. If you have kids in your savings with a 529 plan, or cash value life, which is something where you can hold cash value in life insurance coverage, and that can also grow tax-free and come out tax-free. So some considerations here when diversifying tax-wise is going to be, one, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. So a lot of people who have been accumulating and just saving into those typical contributions there and not really paying attention to that, we see them come in and they're really off balance, right? And their 401k is ready for retirement very much here, and they have pretty much nothing here, right? So then we don't have any flexibility when you get to retirement to be able to pull from certain buckets, right? So if you, and the thing is that, like I mentioned with the possible legislation with long-term capital gains, we don't know what the tax laws are going to look like next year or in 10 years. So having the diversification and having some of this more balanced is really crucial to your portfolio, and having the flexibility when you get to retirement to pull from there. Makes sense there. And I'm going to move this back here. So just give me a moment. Sorry about this. Okay. Okay, so lastly, what we're going to talk about for the income gap in investing wisely is what we call dollar cost averaging. Now, in this example, a person is going to be investing $300 per month. And in this example, it's going to be in the same stock, just for simplicity here. Now, as you can see, in January, she buys the stock at $30 per share, and she only can buy 10 shares, right? Because it's $30, so that makes up the 300. But in February, the share price drops to $10, but she's putting in $300 per month no matter what. So she got 30 shares there. And as you can see over time, as that share price fluctuates, so do the number of shares that she can contribute. So the big thing here is to realize that if upfront she decided to buy all of these shares, or just put in the, let's see, January, February, March, April, May, that's $1,500 at $30 a share. Her average cost per share would have been $30. But because she decided to dollar cost average over time, her average cost per share was $17.24. So that's just another strategy to get in the market at different times and not necessarily feel like you have to time the market correctly and throw everything in at one time. and then not have this dollar cost averaging to assist in getting different share prices there. And Kendra, hey.
Good morning, Katie, can you hear me? Thumbs up. Good, everybody can hear me? Wonderful. Good morning. I am also a newbie to this breakfast, so I'm super excited to be here. And Heather, hopefully I see you this weekend at the Chestertown Fair. I'm a little upset I can't enter my chicken into the cutest chicken contest, but we'll let that one slide for now. So Katie just did a really nice job talking about what I like to call plan A, right? Like where everything's going according to plan. You've negotiated a bigger salary, you're diversified from an investment perspective and a tax perspective, right? So everything's going according to plan. My topic is going to be plan B, which is what if something doesn't go exactly right? So the first thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is the longer lifespans us women face. Katie, next slide. Sorry, I hate saying that, but I'm gonna let you drive it. So women live on average 5 years longer than men and can be considerably more, right? So why I got into this business, just a quick little story time, right? Is I got into this business, I was adopted by my grandparents when I was young, and my grandfather unfortunately passed away when I was a senior in high school. My grandmother brought me to the first meeting with the financial advisor. And a couple of red flags went off. He, first of all, didn't actually know who she was, which was a little concerning to me, but he also didn't plan for my grandmother living longer. And my grandmother, in fact, outlived my grandfather by 12 years. And 8 of those years were in a long-term care facility. So these are things that we as women might face at some point in the future. Katie, next slide for me. So how do we address longer lifespans? Well, number one, we can save more, right? Katie showed and illustrated perfectly in a couple of slides before that Renee also commented on in the chat box is if you start early, it's the keys to the castle, right? Like that's how it works. Just start early. Number 2 is ensuring you have a balanced portfolio. Number 3 is just making sure you're protected, right? I like to call it the preparing for the certainty of uncertainty, right? And lastly, number 4, I can't stand this one, but I always bring it up. It's part of the slides. You can consider working past typical retirement age. But truthfully, the rules that Katie and I have is to get you to retirement when you want to, not that you have to work further. Next slide for me. Save more. Pay yourself first. The best advice I've ever received and given to clients is when you experience, perhaps you did negotiate a bigger salary, right, that we talked about earlier, or maybe you got a pay increase that happens for most folks annually. Consider increasing your contributions into your 401k plan, even if it's 1% annually, right? Just pay yourself first. Also, you want to review your expenses. This is super, super important. If you haven't done the fun exercise, and I'm guilty as charged here too, right? Look at your credit card statement and take a peek at what you're paying for on an automated basis, right? I discovered very quickly that I have like 10 different music streaming services, all totaling over $150, which is just absurd, right? But we've got Disney Plus, Netflix, you name it, it's getting billed. You should just do a deep dive in, I say every 6 months, just to take a peek and see what's really going on there. And lastly, sock away windfalls, right? As you get bonuses and so on and so forth, of course, treat yourself, right? Like you got to live for today, but also consider, maybe increasing that. Remember that $5,000 going in annually for 30 years? Maybe you make it $6,000 and do the calculation as it comes out there. But really, that's kind of how you address this living longer lifespan. Next slide. Consider a balanced portfolio. This is super, super important, right? So we talked about it earlier in the triangle that Katie talked about earlier, the confident retirement approach, right? Talking a little bit about the bottom half of that triangle, right? Covering essential expenses. So there's those, you want to use guaranteed forms of income to do that. So that's what you see here. You see pensions, Social Security, which I'm going to pause here just for a moment. So Social Security is based on your highest 35 earning years, right? So if you're sitting here thinking to yourself, some of us women took time out of work to raise families. Does that impact your Social Security? Of course it does, right? If you haven't done so already, you should log into ssa.gov and pull your statement. Just see where you're falling. And also, I hate to do it, but I'm doing it just because it's timely. If you have any other questions in regards to Social Security, because as you can imagine, it is incredibly complex for us women. Shameless plug here, but Rise is hosting 2 events specifically for Social Security. The first is on Tuesday, September 21st, it's virtual. And then we're also doing an in-person one at the Dairy Field that Thursday, September 23rd. And if you're interested and you want an invitation or more info, just reach out and we'll give it to you. But that's gonna do a deep dive into Social Security and address and answer any questions you have. We bring in an expert, Kurt, he worked for the IRS for 30 plus years. He's an absolute genius when it comes to Social Security. Next slide for me. All right, so let's make sure you're protected, right? Talking about Plan B, I'm getting into doom and gloom stuff here, right? So life insurance, okay? We talked about it earlier. You want to amplify and maximize your benefits coming out of your employer. Most employers will offer some form of life insurance. It could be 1 times your salary, and it typically goes all the way up. I've seen as much as 8 times your salary, actually. So you want to make sure your family's protected. And how do you know if you have enough, right? Or perhaps maybe you have too much, right? You got to look at it a couple of different ways. Life insurance is a funny animal depending upon who you're talking to. You want to make sure you got your needs-based approach, which is, all right, I've got a mortgage, I've got some student loan debt, I've got these things. I want to make sure that stuff is covered if God forbid something were to happen to me. The other approach is human life value, right? Okay, so I've got this mortgage and student loans and all these debts I want to make sure are paid off. I want to make sure my kids can go to school and are taken care of, for example. But what about all the earning years of income I'm going to lose if I die early? So there's 2 different approaches when you look at life insurance. And depending upon where you fall and where your comfort level is, you got to just know what you need, right? The next is disability income. Guys, this is the big one, right? Your ability to earn an income is your greatest asset. I cannot stress this enough. Everything that Katie talked about earlier in this presentation goes kapoof if you are no longer earning an income. So I want to pause here just for a moment because you may be thinking, yeah, I have disability income. It's offered through my employer. And you're probably right? Most employers will offer short-term disability and some will offer long-term disability. Typically, the benefit for a long-term disability policy is 60% of your income. Our human brains think, you know what, 60% is better than 50, so it's got to be good, right? Well, no, let's do some quick math here, right? Let's say, for example, you're making $100,000 a year and you're in the 25% tax bracket. This is really rough numbers, so please. You're earning about $6,250 per month getting deposited into your bank account, right? Into that part of that tax control triangle Katie talked about, the one that's being taxed all the way around. That's the one I'm talking about right here. Now, let's say you have to go out on disability and it's long-term disability. And don't think it has to be an accident, right? Maybe you got sick. I've had clients who were out on long-term disability for vertigo, right? There's things that can happen in your life that you're unable to work. Well, now you're earning 60% of your 100,000. That equals 3,750 because remember, it's still taxable. That's a net difference of $2,500 per month coming into your household. That's a big jump, right? Yeah, some of it's covered, but there's a way that you can bridge that gap. Now, don't get me wrong. There's absolutely no possible way that you can cover 100% of your income. If you could, everybody would be on claim. But there is a way to address that gap. And it may require going out and getting an individual policy, depending upon what your job title is. But it's something that you want to think about and have a conversation with your family about as well. And the next one is long-term care insurance. I said it earlier and I'll say it again. I was adopted by my grandmother, as I mentioned earlier, right? And I said that she outlived my grandfather 12 years. 8 of those years were in a long-term care facility here in New Hampshire. And I can tell you that writing that check every month for care that was, I would say, mediocre, it put a massive drain on her portfolio. There are ways that you can also address this gap too. There's long-term care insurance policies that are standalone, which is pure long-term care insurance. Actually, in fact, a couple of years ago, you couldn't even write them in the state of New Hampshire. And the reason why that is because they pay out the most, right? Especially for us women, especially if we're living longer, right? You can now, thank goodness. But there's also a way that you can actually address two of these gaps, right? You can do some life insurance along with some long-term care, kind of together, right? And depending on your situation, what one is appropriate for you. But these are things that you want to be thinking about. I know it's really doom and gloom for a Wednesday morning in September. It's the best time of the year. But I just want you to start thinking about it, right? Next slide for me, Katie. All right. Okay, so we got multiple roles and responsibilities. When Katie said earlier about wearing the different hats, I don't know about you guys on the call, but 2020 definitely presented more hats than I was willing to take on, right? I was finding myself to be a kindergarten teacher. I was a gym teacher. I was an art teacher. I was all these different things on top of being a financial advisor, a mom, a wife, a friend, sister, all those different things, right? So we have a lot of roles and responsibilities. Next slide. And as I said it earlier, right? We've got our family, we've got our workplace and our community, right? And these are just I like to call these the hats before 2020 came. Now this whole slide would just be littered with different things. But our role is a parent, right? Some of us are moms. We've got young kids, older kids, whatever that may look like. Us moms all can agree that kids are expensive, right? The average cost for raising a child through age 17 is around $235,000 a year. Now, that's a lot. If your kids play any sort of sport or anything like that, you're thinking to yourself, oh man, I'm gonna hit that pretty early on, right? The other one is the average cost of a 4-year university, right? Private school is gonna cost you about $200,000 per year. Per year, holy moly. $200,000 over 4 years. In-state school is around $85,000. And when you're thinking about how you are saving for your kids and your family, you also want to make sure that and be aware of every dollar that you're putting into perhaps maybe a 529 plan for this big college expense coming up for your kids is a dollar taken away from your retirement. So it's a big push and pull here, right? You want to make sure that you're accomplishing two goals and not taking away too much from the other one. The next is your role as a partner, right? Your role with your spouse. Are you having conversations? My favorite thing to do is when I first sit down with a couple, right, is I ask them about their financial goals. What do you want to see happen? I can't tell you enough how many times that I will look across the table and a wife will say, I want to retire to the beach, and their spouse will say, I want to retire to the desert, right? They've never actually had these conversations before. Do they also know, do they know how much protection they had if the unexpected happens, right? Do they know if they have the right insurance? Are the beneficiaries right, for example? And lastly, this is a big one, is making sure that each member of the household has the accessibility to the financial information, right? There's typically a driver in the household, right? One that pays all the bills, one that manages the month-to-month cash flow. Just even if that other person wants absolutely nothing to do with it, which is completely fine, they need to know, number one, where the passwords are to get onto the sites to pay their mortgage, for example, and just know where everything is, right? The checkbook, those sorts of things. And lastly, is your role as a daughter. So I can share with you that we females end up being, most often than not, end up being the caregiver, right? The slide says it's 75% of family caregivers are females, right? That's us. So you've got to have these tough conversations with your parents, right? You're going to want to know what they want to see, what their legacy looks like. Do they have long-term care? Another quick, sorry, I do deviate on stories, but I feel like it tells everything. Another fun thing that I like to do is sitting across from a couple is when I ask, what happens if you need long-term care? Your kids know, and without fail, typically the mom will say, well, my daughter's going to take me in and she's going to take care of me. And typically, dad will normally say, I've already told them, take me out back and just get it done and over with. And I always joke and say, do your kids know that this is your plan? Does your daughter know that she's either A, taking mom into the house to take care of her along with her family and her kids, and she's working and so on and so forth? And does she also know she's going to take dad out back? Like, I highly doubt that they know either one of those things. So it's important to have these conversations with your parents, right? You want to just make sure that you know where their financial stuff is, right? Do they have a will and powers of attorney and trust done? You want to be in the know, because I can tell you that if, God forbid, you lose a parent, this is not what you want to be dealing with, right? You want to be able to mourn their loss. You don't want to be thinking about, oh, geez, like where's this bank account and so on and so forth. Next slide. And lastly, community. Women often give more to charity than men. We're more likely to volunteer our time, and this should be part of your planning. You should want to do these things and have the ability to do them, right? Oh, you're good, Katie, keep going, that's fine. She's like, get off that side. All right, changes that impact finances. All right. Told you, Katie got to do plan A, which is significantly more positive. I'm into plan B, which is significantly more negative. So next slide for me. Let's talk about some of the things that women may face, right? And I'm going to quickly go through this because it's not going to be applicable to everybody, right? But it is applicable to some. Divorce is a big one. Widowhood and an unexpected event, right? Keynote about divorce, right? So, oh, the slide's going to tell us anyways, right? Social Security is a big one after divorce that folks have questions on that will, shameless plug again, be talked about at our Social Security seminar. But you are entitled to receive 50% of your ex-spouse's Social Security benefit. Now, if you're sitting here divorced and thinking, oh, I didn't know that. There are a couple of caveats here that you should be aware of. You needed to be married to the individual for 10 years. You cannot be remarried yourself, and your spousal benefit has to be higher, okay? Retirement plans after divorce. There's things called quadros. There's all these different things. If there's a pension involved and 401k plans, that you need to bring obviously an attorney into, but we also help folks navigate those waters and well, and how that will directly impact your life as you continue to move forward in the next chapter, whatever chapter that you're in. And lastly, it's a new financial reality, right? If you're divorced, all of a sudden your expenses may have cut in half, but now you're kind of on your own with that. Oh, somebody asked in here, what if they are remarried? If you are remarried, if the spouse is remarried, that's fine. You yourself cannot be remarried if you're going to claim your ex-spouse's benefit. Hope that made sense. And then like I was saying, sorry, I just wanted to answer that question in the chat, but your new financial reality is maybe your expenses cut in half, maybe they didn't, maybe they went up, right? Now you've got, you're paying for everything on your own and so on and so forth. So those are some things that you need to think about if you're faced with this situation. Next slide, please. Coping with widowhood. I talked about it earlier, right? Us women tend to outlive our male counterparts, right? So these are things that you will be up against if you're ever faced with that. Social Security, claiming survivor benefit versus your own, retirement plans. You know, what happens next with those? How do you claim them? So on and so forth. These are things that we women tend to face more than our male counterparts. However, it's not applicable to everyone, so I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on it. But if you do have further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Somebody would be happy to answer any questions that you have. And the next one, an unexpected event. Make sure your affairs are in order. I want to pause here. So if you leave here with anything today, this is it. This is what I want you to think about. So most of us are coming up into our favorite time of year, and I don't mean fall and fairs. I mean benefits open enrollment, right? So if that be the case, oftentimes, and more often than not now, a benefit that's offered through employers is a legal plan. And oftentimes it gets overlooked by folks because they think, I don't need an attorney. No. Yes, you do. Especially if you've never done an estate plan, okay? So if you're going through benefits open enrollment and you happen to catch a legal plan service, maybe it's MetLaw or Hyatt, whatever it may be, and you do not have an estate plan done, do yourself a favor and enroll this year and get it done. If you don't have that service, you're not off the hook. You still need to get it. It's just going to cost you out of pocket, right? The legal plan offers you a benefit through the employer. This is going to cost you out of pocket. But you want to make sure a couple of things, right? You want to make sure your beneficiary designations are in order. I cringe when I look at clients' 401k plans. They've been saving their whole life. They've accumulated all sorts of wealth, and I log in and I look at the profile and boom, it says missing beneficiary. That is a nightmare, okay? Make sure your beneficiary designations are in place. Powers of attorney. What is that? That is the ability to allow somebody, maybe it's a spouse, to act on your behalf financially if you are unable to do so. If you are stuck somewhere on vacation, if you are in the hospital, that is a document that allows somebody to act on your behalf. Just because you're married and doesn't mean that your spouse can act on your IRA, for example, right? Last will and testament. Important. It's usually a pour over will considered here in the state of New Hampshire. More importantly here, and should be added to the slide, is something called a family revocable trust. You want to make sure you have that done. It is not true that trusts are only needed for the ultra wealthy. Nope, they are needed for everyone, right? You should have a family trust in order, especially if you own a home and have young children, right? And lastly, most importantly, is a healthcare directive, right? This gives somebody, whether it be a spouse, a child, a friend, and it doesn't matter. It gives somebody the ability to act on your behalf from a health perspective if you cannot act for yourself. So if you're laid up in the hospital and your wishes are to pull the plug, so to speak, this is the document that does that, right? You need to designate that person in order for it to come into effect. It doesn't just automatically happen if you're married. Your spouse can't automatically make that decision. That's a misconception.
Kendra, it looks like we have a question from Renee saying, what age should we start planning affairs?
Great question, Renee, right now, right? There's no time like the present to start planning those things, because here's the problem with Katie and I's role, right? We do not know a couple of things. We do not know what the market's going to do, right? We don't know where tax brackets are going to be. You know what else we don't know? We don't know when you're going to die. Right? And I don't mean to be that blunt about it, but it's what it is, right? You want to make sure that stuff is in order as soon as possible, because you just never know. I have seen really crappy things happen to really great people. And you just want to make sure that yourself is protected, but most importantly, your family, right? That's the big thing. All this estate planning work is, you got to do it while you're living. It doesn't really benefit you all that much until you're gone. And your family will truly appreciate it. I can assure you of that. So now that I've totally just put a big dark cloud on the mood talking about just death and disability and all sorts of stuff, I'm going to roll it back over to Katie to kind of wrap things up. Okay.
Thanks, Kendra. So, I hope my goal at the beginning of this, as I mentioned to you all, was we hope that you learn at least one thing today. And I hope that was the case. In the chat, I'm going to copy and paste just a link to contact us if you have any questions and want to dive in deeper in your personal situation. So I'll send that in the chat box. And feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. And you can see about our Social Security event and everything else that's coming up for us. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Heather. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much, ladies. That was wonderful. Really good things. And I was cracking up, Kendra, you said about what the dads usually do. My dad literally says it all the time. He goes, just smother me with a pillow. That's all you need to do is smother me with a pillow. Literally says that on a yearly basis to me. So there were so many things that you resonated. And when you talked about knowing the passwords, and our last month breakfast, we were talking about cybersecurity and hacking, and our speaker Diana had mentioned about there's password companies and apps you can use to store all those in. So that might be something to consider. You were talking about as a family to know everybody's password. So we do have some time for Q&A, everybody. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box right now, just so I don't have to toggle between chat and Q&A, and we can have Katie and Kendra answer those. I know some of the statistics you put up were really fascinating. We talk about our kids all the time. I have 2 kids in college now and how costly they are. So I'm glad I was wondering. So you said it was $230, almost $34,000 till the age of 17. That's they're going to owe me back some money, I think. Hopefully they get good jobs in college. So our first question is so for Katie and Kendra, it says, what is a good balance for Roth versus traditional pre-tax investments?
Great question. So you're probably not going to like my answer, but in all honesty, it really depends on your personal situation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about factors to consider, right? First is, what's your current taxable income? Are you in your highest earning years right now, and how close are you to retirement, right? Because like we talked about with that tax control triangle, the top bucket, if you're contributing to the Roth when you're really young, and if you remember that time value of money chart that I showed for the 35-year-old investing early on, if you contribute over time, you're going to have the most money at the end, right? So when you're younger, if you're not earning as much, oftentimes we recommend fully Roth for people, right? You're going to be building that pre-tax bucket because your employer match is always going to be pre-tax no matter what. When you get in later on in life, when you and your spouse are earning higher incomes, and you have and traditional might be a better option to keep you in certain brackets, or there's some more complex planning involved in that. That's when some sort of mix is appropriate. So I hope that answers some of your question, but in all honesty, it really depends on your personal situation and your full financial picture.
Katie, a follow-up to that. Aren't there income limits to invest in a Roth?
Great question, Heather. So there's Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs, and then there's Roth 401ks. So there's no income limit to invest in your 401k in the Roth option if your company has a Roth option. For Roth IRAs, there are income limits for that. So a lot of people get those confused. So that's why it's important to kind of understand which is for your 401k and which is for your IRAs, because IRAs do have income limits for deductibility and contributing to Roth.